I have the pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Amy Konary, Vice President at IDC, where she's been for 16 years now, I believe. Also responsible for launching the SaaS practice at IDC, where she also ran the SaaS practice for over 8 years. Looking forward to your speech about the connected world.
Great, thank you. And so I took a spin class this morning, and for any of you that have taken spin classes or maybe done interval training, like the first part's like this crazy sprint, and you're sprinting. And as I was listening to Ray's wonderful presentation, I was imagining my mind, like on this crazy spin, and I'm doing this and that, and the music's blasting. And so I was trying to figure out the yin and the yang in presentations and how's mine. Our presentations without planning are quite synergistic with one another, without overlap. So I think but sort of how can I be the yang to raise yin in this scenario? So I'm going to be kind of the breathing exercise, at the end of the sprint, where we can all kind of settle in and digest before we actually go and digest at lunch. So I'm not going to do as much running back and forth, primarily because I'm in heels, which I didn't notice you wearing them. So it's a little disadvantage, and I could picture myself tripping at least 5 or 6 different ways. So I'm kind of going to be stationary, but again, let's kind of sink in all of this information and take it down to your level. I love thinking of examples from different industries and bringing them back to technology. This particular presentation is all about access, which Ray talked a lot about. It's not own, it's access. That's part of the sharing economy, of course. It's part of the experience economy, the transformation economy, co-creation of value, whatever it is you call it. Just a few examples of people participating in accessing experiences. I'm not going to go through all of these. IDC's drawing of the third platform, which I think Ray sufficiently talked a lot about, cloud and big data and social and mobile. So I'm really just going to focus in on, again, the access piece and what does that mean for all of our individual roles in what we do. So by 2015, Ericsson, who tracks this type of thing, predicts that there'll be more, we'll kind of cross this point where there are more global cellular connections than people. So we're not talking about wireless hotspots, per se, and an individual with 5 devices, which there are a lot of those in the developed world. Of course, in other parts of the world, that 5-to-1 ratio isn't quite there. And obviously, there are now larger number of things and a growing number of connected devices that are part of this network. So that's pretty transformative. I think many of us, and I was thinking of some of Ray's examples of the sharing economy. I have a growing number of icons on my mobile device connected to applications. And that's, for me, the first thing that I think of, Airbnb, I want to check them out. I don't go to my laptop and look up Airbnb. I typically, because I'm one of those instant gratification people, will pick up the device that's in my back pocket almost all the time. When I have pockets, women's clothing, they sew them shut very often. I think they want us to think we're streamlined or something. Not very helpful. But in any case, that's where I typically go first. And we're finding, that's a consumer world, but we're finding more and more for enterprise applications as well. People are going mobile first. I attended a really, really big conference last week in San Francisco, took over the whole city. Probably a few of you were there. But there was one, you take away different sound bites. There was one sound bite from the CEO of Coca-Cola Germany. I don't know if you remember this sound bite. But he said the most dangerous place to make a decision is in the corporate office. And the point was you need to be out where things are actually happening, where customers are, where partners are, where distributors are. And when you're out in those realms, you typically aren't carrying something like this around. You're carrying something like this around, or a tablet, or a watch, or some other type of device. And so very instructive. What people are looking to do with these applications, of course, is improve productivity. And I think the first phase of mobile access is information access. So I'm going to get my email on my phone, and that's not really transformative. It might increase productivity to a certain degree, but it's not actually giving me some context and building in all of the different features that I can now access because I'm mobile. The fact that I'm there with the customer, the fact that there is a related business very close to me that I might like to attend, and the fact that there are 5 or 6 different data stores that I can pull from on that mobile device to make decisions. However, despite all of the fact that we think a very large percentage of folks out there are going to be using their mobile device primarily for work, there's not a huge revenue play associated with that. So I'm spending a lot of my time slightly in a different life. If I could cut myself in 3 or 4 pieces, one of the 4 pieces of me is looking a lot at mobile applications. And there are a lot of big companies struggling with the fact that we're spending all these development dollars on these products, and we're expecting to get paid for them the same way that we've always gotten paid for our software. We'll license it out to people. They'll have to buy middleware. That's not the model for these applications. Increasingly, the model is, well, you have to have them because it's part of the buy decision, or it increases adoption of the core system that you have, or there are other related services that you can sell. So this is just one concrete example in the tech world of devices, or the devices plus the connectivity, really changing the business model for bits, for software. You cannot sell it the way that you maybe sold software on a server or on a PC in the past. Another example, you mentioned I've been doing this for 16 years, and it does seem like a very long time. Yes, I did start right out of high school. That's always the first question that I get when I tell people how long I've been at IDC, and IDC wasn't even my first job. I was at a software company before that. But I remember back in 2000-ish, early 2000s, I did a presentation where I talked about my new favorite thing, which was my iPod. And the idea that I had something that looked like this, and I could create my own experience. And very transformative, so different from the mixtape. Remember we used to make the mixtape, or even before that, I used to go and listen to songs on the radio, and I had my tape recorder that my grandfather gave me for my whatever birthday, and I would tape the song. I remember Thriller was one of the first songs that I taped on my tape recorder, and then I could play it later on demand. So this was hugely transformative to me and the way that I interact with music, and I think that was hugely transformative to many, many people. And as I often do when I'm sitting creating these presentations, it's part of the problem with constant connectivity is you can go off in a million different tangents. So I was this was something I pulled off of Google Images or something. This isn't my actual screen. But like, oh, New Order. I really liked New Order. I remember seeing their videos on MTV, and they were always crazy. There was some huge ball, and they were throwing it around. I wonder what song, Blue Monday. And so I thought, hey, I'd like to hear that song. And what did I do? Did I go into my personal music collection and try to find this song, or dig in my box of tapes or maybe even CDs? No. I did what my kids do. I opened up a browser and I went to YouTube to listen to this song. And it was great. I had to watch an ad before I actually listened to the song. But I could sit there, and my kids now, not only will they expect that they can get any song that they want, they'll look for mashups. Oh, and I'm a little embarrassed to say that my 6-year-old listens to these songs, but my 6-year-old's 2 favorite songs are Turn Down for What and Talk Dirty to Me, the edited version. And he found the other day a mashup of those 2. And this was like, you've never seen a child smile so big as this child listening to this mashup of these 2 songs. And that was just amazing to me to see, and I do it to a degree too, but how much his experience of interacting with music and creating his own value around music differs from mine. And so then my mind continues to go on tangents. I'm like, God, how do they make money from doing this? Like, what's the revenue model? So if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, something like 8 million views for this particular song. And many of the people listening to it might look a little bit like this. So if you take that iconic iPod ad from years ago, this is the Spotify ad. Listen to someone else's music. Again, with the sharing economy really ties into that. And I think the idea that the iPod as a device, and you add connectivity to that, and suddenly you're like me, so spinning class again, you can this particular chain of spinning places has a Spotify song list that they publish. So as I'm driving to spinning class this morning, I didn't take my music collection with me. I just happened to have my mobile phone in a rental car, which of course has a USB port. I pulled up, before I started driving, I pulled up the Spotify list, pressed shuffle play, and drove to Palo Alto to take the spin class, all the while listening to the spin music, getting myself excited, and then listened to the spin music on the way home. completely different experience, and even I myself, this future-looking analyst person, would never have imagined that I could do something like what I did, thinking about the experience and how transformative I thought it was just a short time ago. So, the reason I bring up the music industry isn't to show a lucrative business model, because it really isn't. So going back to that 8,000 plays, that's about $5,000 for new order, because it takes about 1,500 streams to equal one album sale. Sorry, that's about 5,000 album sales, not $5,000. So it's still like halfway decent for a band that, God, I don't know how long they were defunct, although they've recently come back together under a new name, whatever. All these tangents that I went in as I was like, oh, whatever happened to New Order? The point is, the music industry is shifting towards this streaming model, an example of something that we've all seen, something that's changed very rapidly. And we thought, wow, it had transformed back in the 2000 timeframe. That was amazing. And now we've even created a greater shift. Taking that back down to all of our own daily lives, I've interacted with a lot of you over the years, and I know what you do within your organization and also what you're up against. The topic of software licensing, although it's super-de-duper exciting to all of us, your illustration of the CEOs was spot on. What do they care about? What can they understand? CEOs, very smart people, and I'm not saying that you need to talk down to them necessarily, but they've got a lot of things going on. They don't want to hear the nitty-gritty of the software industry or the software business or your software licensing issues. That's like a product management thing. That's not an industry change thing. And I think oftentimes, even though the writing is on the wall, it's not always obvious that the writing is on the wall. So here's an example of an industry where the writing was on the wall to a degree, a very quick transformation that took place that we all experienced. And by the way, post note on New Order, they've actually had this marvelous rebirth. How can that be? Well, in part, it's because 8,000 probably new people have just discovered them on YouTube. There's maybe a fraction of people like myself that remember them from back in the day, but there's also a whole bunch of new people now that are discovering and experiencing what it is they provide. They're also getting closer to their customers. So I have a few friends that are professional musicians. One who's quite successful, and that's the only thing she does. She's played at the White House for the First Family a number of times. The only way that she can really make money doing what she does is doing things like festivals, house concerts, so personalized one to very few types of experiences. So, bringing what she does down to a personal level and experiencing the music really with her constituents, her experiencing it firsthand. That's a really tough model for musicians and for her, and she can't necessarily scale that very easily. So I think in the experience creation in the music industry in particular, a lot of really big shifts happening, and the individual artists and musicians having a difficult time, I think, making a living. Most of them, of course, if you're Will.i.am, you just launch some line of wearables and you'll be okay. But it really has created a lot of shift. And as I again drill down into New Order some more, I think some of this chaotic stuff that doesn't make quite sense, that does make sense holistically and appeals to people at a base level. We see a lot of that in the sharing economy and the different types of services that you would say the idea of sharing someone's car at the airport, that's ridiculous. Why would anyone want strangers driving their cars around? What about insurance? What if they use the car to do a crime? Actually, those are all the things that were running through my head as Ray mentioned that example. But somebody figured that out, I assume. I don't know. But someone has figured this out. Someone has figured out how to make it work, and that's the difference between, I guess, a really successful business idea and someone that and actually gets it done versus someone who thinks it through and can think of a number of reasons why it wouldn't work. So back to the software industry here. I want to use a Microsoft example, which I haven't done in years. But I actually, when it comes to licensing, I'm feeling a little bit better about Microsoft recently than I have in the past. And one of the examples from Microsoft in this access type of paradigm, so we're seeing a lot of shifts away from device-based licensing models. Part of it is because that 1 to 5 type ratio. Part of it is because the idea of usage and consumption is something that appeals more to people than counting actual devices. So Windows Intune is a client device management software, because a lot of times I would talk about shift away from device licensing, and the question is always, yeah, but what about if there's a clear connection between what your product does and the number of clients, and that's how you calculate value? Well, here's an example of something that clearly there's a connection between the number of clients and the value, but they've shifted away from a device-based licensing approach for Windows Intune for a variety of reasons. Part of it is because the entire company is trying to simplify their licensing approach while also moving to the cloud and providing additional flexibility. So as many of you probably know firsthand, that's a pretty tall order. Now, in key Microsoft fashion, they can't just say we're moving to a user model. They've got to put all this other stuff on the screen as well. So that's fairly instructive. It's not simple necessarily, but the point is they're shifting away from device licensing for a device management system. I did a survey recently of end customers. This was for a consulting project that I was doing for another company who was trying to launch a similar product. And our question out to a survey, and this wasn't, do you like how Microsoft pays? It was for this particular type of software, how they charge, how would you like to pay? And we've actually started to see a shift away from device-based licensing toward user-based licensing for that particular type of software, which tells me that people are fairly happy with that approach. In fact, the number one different way that they liked to price was on a flat fee basis with some sort of a band around that, which speaks to people's desire for predictability in licensing. And the shift that we're seeing, and as Ray was talking, I was oftentimes kind of plotting what we were talking about on this chart. So many of you may have read back in 1998, 1997, a piece called Welcome to the Experience Economy. It was published in Harvard Business Review, written by a few folks, Pine and Gilmore. And it talked about, it actually, in 1998, it only went up to experiences. And so the idea is that the overall industry, wasn't any one industry in particular, shifts from goods to products to services to experiences and then out to transformations. So that was the addition that they put in 2011. You could call that outcomes as well. And as you are closer down to the goods, you're much more commoditized. As you shift up to transformations, experiences, much less commoditized. And if you think about the overall software industry, and not just pure play software companies, but also device companies in software, this deliver services piece is where a lot of people are stuck right now. And it's definitely a better place to be, I think, than goods or commodities or products. But it's an area where you've got a good amount of value that you can provide. The reason that a lot of folks are stuck in that particular area has to do with the challenge of transitioning from a product to a services business. How do we sell it? What are the systems that we use to support it? All of those types of things. But when I have conversations with folks and brainstorming, I think what we would really like to try to figure out for all of you and help you figure out is how we move from services to experiences to transformations from a business model perspective. And I think that's what we've been talking about. And I think Ray's presentation gave some examples from the consumer sector. And given that we are all probably stuck on services for a while, I think that the consumer world is probably going to move ahead of where software can go, as an example, right away, especially if you've got a legacy business that you're trying to transform. This isn't just you moving people up the chart to value. This is your customers being ready to move up the value, your executives being ready to move up to experiences and finally to transformation. So the other, when this article came out in Harvard Business Review, there was a lot of criticism around it because there's also this idea of the co-creation of value. And isn't this just co-creation of value or just a different way of talking about value co-creation? They're essentially the same type of thing, and Ray talked about them interchangeably in his presentation as well. But what are some of the different pricing elements that become important in this experience economy or in a situation where you have a co-creation of value? Transparency. Ray talked about that as well, and in his chart, from a software pricing and licensing perspective, what is the framework and what are the different choices that I have? I talked to a customer last week of a large enterprise software company, and they just kind of wanted to get a sanity check with what they were hearing. And he said, I'm getting 3 completely different ways that I can buy this software. And I don't understand. They're all different from one another, and I don't know which one is the right one for me. And so I asked him, so of the 3 different people that you're talking to or partners, which one do you feel the most comfortable with? He said, no, this is all the same person. The same person has given me 3 different ways to buy. And when I pushed back on him, he said, in fact, there are 7 different ways. And the salesperson basically told him, I really don't understand them. I was talking to someone else this morning. They have 12 products and 40,000 SKUs associated with those 12 products. I don't even know where to begin there if I'm trying to make a decision, as a customer of which, and then to think of the sales rep of how do I pick the combination of SKUs or a partner, and do I have to stock all those SKUs? It just sounds crazy. But there's obviously a complexity angle here, but the transparency, like what am I going to get and what do I have to do to get it? Just at that simplest level is something that people need and are looking for today. Subscription, so just the ability to align cost and experience over time. The big problem with the perpetual license model is that it assumes that you can calculate all the potential value upfront of this product, of this service. And that's not what happens in an experience economy or in a co-creation of value. Value changes over time. You hope as a provider that the value increases over time and that you're able to extract value from the customer over time by getting them to pay more or buy more services or expand the footprint of what they provide. So not having a subscription approach or not fine-tuning that subscription approach prohibits you from moving from goods to services to experiences and transformation. Additions. So this kind of goes along the lines of transparency, but the ability to get people in on the ground floor. How can I get you to try out what I have? And it could be a free model, though I'm not a huge fan of freemium approaches. But what is the way, how are you going to package and price in such a way that there's something for everyone? Someone who's just trying things out and might not be sure of what their value is going to be or how much they're going to commit, all the way up to someone who's an absolutely elite gold status type of a customer. Those things become really important in this type of approach in this experience economy. And then finally, this usage piece, critically important as well. How do I, as a end customer, I would like to know what I used. I would like to know how maybe what I used compares to what I should be using. I'd like to then be able to connect that back to what I'm paying. As a provider, it's obvious how that usage data could be really important. And not just because it allows you to sell more to people, maybe because it allows you to support customers more effectively, or it can inform your product development choices down the road. So this usage piece becomes critically important, again, in being able to move up that chain. So what are the challenges? The esoteric, here's this is the new economy and we're all going to participate in it and there's so many great options for us. Forgetting how are we going to get from here to here from a value and revenue perspective, because that's a really big challenge, and that's one of the reasons why these transitions are taking multiple years and why you have industries like the music industry that are completely flat on their head. But the systems themselves to support these types of businesses have to change. You move from a ERP system designed to sell products to one that's designed to sell services and experiences, and you end up with 7 customer data stores, 3 independent payment collection systems, billing systems that don't talk to one another, no centralized view of the customer. And that's the norm in a lot of, not only in the technology industry, but also companies like Time Warner, as an example, that are shifting their business models, media companies as well, towards this experience type of economy. And the challenge is getting from there to here requires some disruption, and it is not so much industry disruption, but disruption within your own businesses. And how do you go through that necessary disruption without damaging the customer experience? That's another big question that folks have. How do we've got people who want to buy this way, we've got people that want to buy this way, we have to kind of satisfy 2 sides of the coin. We've got this type of margin, we know we need to grow here, but this is 40%, this is 4%. How do we do that at the same time? And it's not easy, and it's what most companies are in the thick of right now, but it has to be done. It just does not seem possible that these changes are not going to actually come to fruition, because they really are, whether we're all ready for it or not. So just to close up, does anybody know what this is besides the obvious? I know we all know. This is actually not a floppy disk. This is the original album cover for New Order's Blue Monday. And this is a little bit of trivia about, so you can see there is no branding or anything on that. One of the things that was fairly cool about this particular album cover was that in order to decipher who this was from or what song it is, you had to buy the next album, which actually came with a color-coded wheel that you could then take and figure out. So if you go to design, about these design and packaging websites, this was like one of the best designed. It won all kinds of awards. The only problem was that it cost £1.15 to make this album cover, and the album itself sold for £1. So every single album that they sold, they lost money on. They lost, was it 15p for every single one. In order to close up my presentation, I was thinking, oh, the perfect thing would be to try to find a New Order lyric that totally makes sense. And what I found, again, when I wasted way more time than I needed to looking through lyric sheets, is that their lyrics make no sense whatsoever. And it was just the fact that they were doing something different. It's actually very high-tech at the time. They had drum machines with a synthesizer, and they read some blog posts. I went into so many different tangents with this, but they hired someone they called a scientist at the time to try to figure out how to coordinate the drum beat with the synthesizer, and they did that first, and then they're like, oh, well, what words can we make up to go with that drum beat and synthesizer? And that's essentially what they did, and people are still listening to it today and seeing them perform live. But I did find one little nugget. I'm like, oh, yeah, I can kind of relate this back to what I know folks are experiencing, is that we are in this segment of an industry that looks a little bit like the software industry. And the software industry, and the way that we've maybe thought about it historically, is very different from what we need to be today. But we still have these circles around us, these perpetual license plus maintenance circles. The circles of, every time I, open a port on this router, it's a new SKU, instead of using licensing to enable something along those lines. When I got into my rental car yesterday, I was very excited because our cars at home are old, so they don't have kind of the high-tech stuff today. But it had the screen, and it had an apps button on it. So this is so awesome. I talk about this all the time. I've never actually been in a car. So I was on 280 when I realized this, and it was really slow traffic. So I pushed apps, and I'm waiting for something to happen. Oh, this is really great. I can't wait to see. And the message that popped up is, see available software licenses. And if I had not been driving in the car, I would have taken a picture, and I would have shown it in my presentation. Why do I want to see the available software licenses in my car? I just wanted the apps. I could care less. Even as a person who makes their living talking about software licensing, I don't want to know that there's software licensing in this car. I just want to know that I want to interact with this app. And it turned out there was a maintenance thing and a 911 link, which I didn't push because I was afraid it was going to call 911. But we have to get out of this circle of this, the idea that licensing is something we use to restrict people, and instead it's to enable people, and it's so good at enabling people that you don't even know that it's there. It's like a matchmaker between me and an experience, but the matchmaker is invisible. And that's where we need to go, I think, to get up to this experience economy. And thank you for allowing me to go in my tangents of the music, and hopefully this is a good segue for you to have some lunch and some more conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I must say I stopped listening in the last minute, because when you said New Order made music first and then they were thinking about what text to put on top of it, I suddenly had a flash, and I saw all the presentations I've seen in my life where I had the impression people did the PowerPoints first before they think what story they want to say. Yeah, so interesting. Thanks.